Have you ever felt like your mind was working against you? Like no matter how hard you try to stay sharp, others just seem to think faster, speak better, and see further. It's easy to believe intelligence is something you're either born with or you're not. But the Stoics knew better. To them, intelligence wasn't about storing facts or speaking with flair. It was about clarity, discernment, the ability to focus on what truly matters and to remain calm when others collapse into chaos. Real intelligence, they believed, begins not with what you know, but with how you think, how you respond, how you choose. In this video, we're going to explore 15 quiet, powerful lessons drawn from Stoic philosophy. Lessons that won't just help you think smarter, but live wiser. Lessons that reshape the way you engage with yourself and the world around you. So if you're ready to sharpen more than just your thoughts, stay with me. This may be the shift your mind has been waiting for. 1. Intelligence is built, not born. Have you ever looked at someone and thought, they're just naturally smart, I could never think like that? That quiet belief that intelligence is something you're either born with or not is more dangerous than you think, because the moment you accept it, you stop growing, you stop trying, and worst of all, you stop questioning your own limits. The Stoics never believed that wisdom was a gift reserved for the chosen few. In fact, they would have called that belief a form of cowardice. Epictetus, who was born a slave, wrote and taught as a free man of reason. Marcus Aurelius, an emperor, reminded himself daily that wisdom wasn't granted by birthright, but forged by reflection, discipline, and constant correction of the self. To the Stoic mind, reason is not a luxury, it's a responsibility. It is the one thing that separates us from animals. You were born with hands, so you can build. You were born with a voice, so you can speak. But you were born with a mind, so you can think. And like any tool, the mind grows sharper the more you use it. The real difference between a clear thinker and a confused one isn't raw intelligence. It's how often they ask hard questions, especially to themselves. The Stoics didn't glorify brilliance or talent. They honored effort. Effort to think with clarity, to pause before reacting, to seek truth even when it's uncomfortable. That's intelligence in their eyes. You might say, well, I'm not wired for deep thinking. Philosophy isn't for me. But I'll ask you this. Have you ever truly sat in silence and questioned your own assumptions? Have you challenged your habits of thought or just inherited them? It's not that you can't think clearly, it's that you've never made it your mission to try. Modern science, ironically, is now catching up to ancient wisdom. Neuroscience shows that the brain is remarkably plastic. It reshapes itself when challenged. You can form new pathways, new habits. Even in your 50s, 60s, or 70s, you can learn a new language, train your memory, shift the way you respond to stress. And it doesn't require genius. It requires repetition, focus, and humility. Exactly what the Stoics preached thousands of years ago. So the next time you catch yourself thinking you're not smart enough, pause. Remember this: no one is born wise. Wisdom is earned. Thought by thought. Choice by choice. You don't need a bigger brain. You need a clearer intention. And once you set that intention, once you decide to take responsibility for the power of your own mind, everything begins to change. Because intelligence isn't a gift, it's a path. And the first step is the courage to walk it. Let's keep walking. Lesson 2 is just ahead. 2. Read to grow smarter. Your brain is not a stone. It's not fixed. It's not done. It's clay, soft, shapeable, alive, and the hands that shape it are your habits. One of the greatest discoveries in modern science, neuroplasticity, confirmed what the Stoics already lived by. The mind grows sharper the more you use it intentionally. And one of the simplest, most powerful tools for sharpening your mind is reading. Not scrolling, not reacting. Reading. Slowly, deeply, deliberately. Every time you read a book, you give your mind something to wrestle with. Every time you wrestle with an idea, whether it's an argument from Marcus Aurelius or a chapter from Epictetus, you are sculpting the way you think. You're strengthening the very muscle that helps you see clearly through chaos, through conflict, through confusion. And if you think you're too old to change how you think, you've misunderstood how the mind works. Mental stagnation doesn't come from age, it comes from routine. From living the same year over and over again, from choosing the path of least resistance. Just as the body weakens without movement, the mind dulls without challenge. That's why the Stoics didn't just sit and meditate all day. They read, they wrote, they reflected, they questioned. Seneca devoured philosophy. Marcus Aurelius carried scrolls with him into battle, writing in the margins between wars. Epictetus reminded his students not just to learn philosophy, but to live it. Reading isn't about collecting information, it's about transformation. A single paragraph can reshape your life if you truly understand it. But that requires effort. It requires stillness. It requires a willingness to let go of what you think you know and confront ideas that stretch you. And this isn't just stoicism. This is how every sharp mind throughout history has evolved. Whether it's a monk copying texts in silence or a soldier writing reflections in his tent, wisdom begins with paying attention to how you think. And reading is the mirror that reveals your blind spots. But reading alone isn't enough. You must reflect on what you read. Ask, what does this mean for how I live? What would I do differently if I truly believed this? The Stoic doesn't read to impress. He reads to examine himself. And he never trusts his first thought, because he knows it's probably just a reflex, not a reasoned judgment. So if you want to grow smarter, don't wait for the world to hand you wisdom. Open a book, open your eyes, and begin shaping your mind like a craftsman shapes marble. Slowly, patiently, but with purpose. Because in the end, the world doesn't need louder opinions. It needs clearer minds. And the clearer your mind becomes, the more prepared you'll be for what comes next. Let's keep going. Lesson 3 awaits. 3. Learn new skills. Often, most people don't realize that what they call thinking is often just repetition. Same reactions, same assumptions, same opinions playing on loop like an old recording. It feels smart because it's fast. But speed isn't clarity, it's just habit. And habit without awareness becomes a prison. If you're not careful, the past becomes your software, and you run it without question. But the Stoics were not people who let the past dictate their present. They treated the mind like land, a field that needs to be cleared before anything new can grow. Each day, a fresh beginning. Not because the past didn't matter, but because wisdom must be planted intentionally again and again. Picture your mind as a forest. Walk the same trail every day, and yes, it gets easier. But easy isn't growth. Easy is familiarity. You don't have to think, you don't have to struggle. But struggle is where intelligence begins. When you try something new, learn a new skill, ask a deeper question, practice a new discipline, you're cutting through the brush. It's slower. It's uncomfortable, but it leads somewhere your old thoughts never could. To the Stoic, this discomfort is sacred. Real thinking isn't about having all the answers. It's about developing the strength to sit with not knowing, to pause long enough that a real insight can arrive. Intelligence isn't about reacting quickly. It's about absorbing slowly, holding opposing ideas in your mind without immediately taking sides. Listening not to reply, but to understand. And you can't learn this from headlines. You can't absorb it from fast content. It comes from direct confrontation with your own mind. Learning new skills, especially those that stretch you, forces your brain to change its patterns. And that change, scientifically, is neuroplasticity. But philosophically, it's self-mastery. A Stoic doesn't grow because of comfort. They grow because they lean into challenge again and again. One of the most important Stoic questions is deceptively simple. What am I in control of right now? You could spend a lifetime with just that one. If you sit with it long enough, it begins to reveal everything. Your attention, your attitude, your choices. When you stop trying to control the external world and start cultivating your inner one, that's when wisdom roots itself. That's when learning becomes a way of life. Marcus Aurelius wrote not to teach others, but to remind himself. Every day, like a blacksmith at the forge, he shaped his mind through repetition, reflection, practice. That's what learning truly is. You try something new, you fail, you adjust, you repeat. Wisdom isn't built by inspiration, it's built by rhythm. Maybe today you read a dense passage, tomorrow you write one paragraph about it. The next day you bring that mindset into a conversation. And maybe no one notices, but something is shifting beneath the surface. A pause before you speak, a deeper breath when you're frustrated, a moment of restraint when you could have reacted. These are the invisible signs that learning is taking root. The truth is, on the days you feel stuck, you're probably growing the most. The brain doesn't always show progress like a muscle, but it forms connections in silence. The days when it feels hardest to think are often the days when your old patterns are being challenged. Don't run from them. Lean in. Ask yourself, when was the last time I learned something difficult, not for success, but for growth? When was the last time I read without skimming, wrote without editing my truth? Chose silence because I was thinking, not because I was unsure. These are not flashy acts, but they build a different kind of strength, the kind that doesn't fade. You don't need a complete overhaul to become wiser. You just need 15 minutes. Read something that stretches you. Practice something you're not good at. Question one belief you've carried for too long. The goal isn't to impress anyone. The goal is to wake up. Because real intelligence isn't just about solving problems, it's about seeing clearly, and seeing clearly takes work. The Stoics didn't call it neuroplasticity, but they lived it. Through repeated thought, repeated questioning, repeated reminders, they rewired their inner world. Not through sudden enlightenment, but through steady practice. So start small. A blank page. A passage from Seneca, a quiet moment of reflection before you speak. These are the tools, the hammer, the chisel. Use them, because your mind is not fixed, it's forgeable. And what you choose to shape today will shape the way you walk into tomorrow. Let's keep going. The next lesson takes us deeper. 4. Shift to a growth mindset. What comes after learning something new? After reading philosophy, watching your thoughts, reflecting in silence, you turn inward and then you act outward. But first, you must shift the very ground your mind stands on, and that begins with your mindset. A Stoic never assumes they've arrived. They live in the space between what they know and what they have yet to understand. That space is where growth happens. But you cannot grow if you secretly believe your intelligence is fixed, your personality is set, and your habits define who you are. That's not humility, that's quiet resignation. The growth mindset isn't a slogan, it's a philosophical stance. It means you stop asking, "Am I smart enough?" and start asking, "How can I train my mind to become wiser?" And there's one tool that remains unmatched in that training: reading. But not reading for information, reading for transformation. We live in an age that confuses knowledge with wisdom. You can spend an entire day scrolling through quotes from Marcus Aurelius and still not understand a single one, because what you read only becomes real when you live it. The Stoics read, yes, but they read like soldiers scanning a battlefield, looking for clarity. Every word was a potential mirror, not a trophy. Ask yourself this: how often do you actually sit with what you read? Not share it. Not highlight it for others, but sit with it. Turn it over. Feel its friction against your life. Most of what people read today is forgotten within hours, not because their minds are weak, but because their hearts never touched the words. Reading becomes consumption, quick, clever, and empty. It's like sampling dishes at a buffet. A taste here, a quote there, and then you leave the table full, but unsatisfied. Stoic reading is different. It's slower, hungrier. You chew on the sentence until it bites back. You don't read to escape reality. You read to confront it with new eyes. I once met a man in his 60s who lived alone in a quiet home outside the city. He had no TV, no smartphone, just a small wooden shelf with 30 books. Mostly philosophy, some poetry, a few ancient histories. When I asked him why he hadn't added more, he smiled. "These are enough," he said. "Every time I return to them, I feel like I'm the one who changed, not the words." That's what Stoic reading does. It changes the reader. Not by giving you more to say, but by stripping away what never served you. Ego, assumptions, fear of not knowing. And that shift doesn't come from quantity, it comes from depth. A single sentence read at the right moment can redirect your entire life, but only if you're still enough to hear it. So how do you train your mind to read like that? Slow down, read a short passage, then stop. Close the book. Sit with what you just read and ask, what does this change about the way I see the world? What part of me resists this truth? Don't summarize. Don't memorize. Respond. Live with the words long enough that they seep into your next conversation, your next choice, your next reaction. And that's when reading becomes a forge, not a shelf. That's when it stops being intellectual and becomes spiritual. Books are not trophies. They're tools. They sharpen you only when used. And the edge you're aiming for is not to become brilliant, but to become clear. Marcus Aurelius wasn't wise because he read more. He was wise because he wrote what he read. He questioned it. He contradicted himself. He carried it into battle. He didn't seek knowledge for status. He sought it because he knew one truth. If you don't master your mind, someone else will. So read, but read with fire. Read like your future depends on what you absorb, because it does. This world will offer you 1,000 distractions, opinions, reactions, noise. Reading gives you something rare, a quiet place to return to. A place to rewire your thinking, to unlearn the noise, and to remember who you are when the world isn't looking. The Stoics didn't read to win debates. They read to lose illusions. That's what separates a mind that performs from a mind that transforms. And if you've read this far, maybe it's time to pause and reflect. What's one sentence, one line, one truth you've read in your life that actually changed how you live? Comment it below, or just drop the word reflect if something stirred in you. And if you haven't already, subscribe for more of this quiet kind of clarity. No pressure, just the invitation to think deeper. Because reading alone won't save you, only practice will. That's why this mindset, this willingness to grow, is only the beginning. Growth without application is noise. You must act. And there is no greater training ground than skill. Learning something new humbles the ego, sharpens attention, and reminds you what it feels like to begin again. So in the next part, we'll explore why true Stoic intelligence comes not just from reading or reflecting, but from doing, from learning a new skill that makes you stumble, sweat, and think all over again. Let's keep going. Wisdom waits on the other side of action. 5. Challenge your brain daily. There's a quiet contradiction that follows many of us into adulthood. We say we want to grow, to become sharper, more insightful, more capable. Yet when the opportunity to do something new appears, we hesitate. We retreat into comfort, into the roles we've already mastered, into the skills we know best. We call it security. We call it knowing who we are. But the Stoics had another name for it: complacency, and to them it was one of the greatest dangers to the mind. Nothing dulls the intellect faster than familiarity. Nothing slows the spirit more than a routine that asks nothing new of you. If the mind is left untouched, unchallenged, it begins to tighten. Like a field that's never replanted, the soil grows tired. Like a blade that's never sharpened, the edge goes dull. If you want to remain mentally alive, you must be willing to step back into the shoes of a beginner, to struggle, to stumble, to not know, and to stay there long enough for your perspective to change. Because real intelligence isn't found in ease, it's formed in resistance, not from the applause of others, but from how you talk to yourself when you're lost, when you're unsure, when you're learning something you've never tried before. The mind is not a vessel to be filled, it is a flame to be kindled. It needs friction, newness, surprise. That's why the Stoics didn't aspire to become encyclopedias of knowledge. They aspired to become students of reality, humble enough to admit what they didn't know, brave enough to step into the unknown with open eyes. In a world where information is everywhere, it's easy to feel smart without ever stretching your limits. You can scroll through insights all day and still avoid transformation. That's why doing something unfamiliar, learning a skill that isn't tied to your job or your ego, is one of the most powerful practices you can adopt. Not because you need another talent, but because the process reshapes your brain and, more importantly, your identity. Imagine someone who spent their life behind a desk, suddenly deciding to take up woodworking. On the surface, it might seem like a hobby. But what they're actually doing is retraining their attention, rewiring their focus. They begin noticing grain patterns, angles, weight, space. Their hands learn what their eyes once ignored. Their mind begins forming new bridges. And eventually that same clarity begins to reflect in their relationships, their patience, their judgment. Not because they've learned more, but because they've learned differently. Learning something outside your world cracks the shell of your assumptions. A programmer who studies calligraphy starts thinking about form, flow, balance. A lawyer who practices meditation begins to see silence as a form of strength. A business person who takes up drawing discovers the power of observation, not just of shapes, but of human behavior. The more you step outside your known territory, the more the world starts to connect. Suddenly, there's no such thing as wasted knowledge. Every skill becomes a lens through which you see deeper, and that is what real intelligence is, not the stacking of facts, but the weaving of insights. Not memorizing more, but perceiving more clearly. Of course, this path isn't easy. Most people stop at the first wave of discomfort. They think, I'm just not cut out for this. They confuse not knowing with not belonging. But the Stoics would say the opposite. If you feel lost, you're probably in the right place, because that's where your mind is most open. where it's listening, where it's learning. They didn't pursue learning to appear wise. They pursued it because the act of learning revealed their character. The moment you begin something new, your attitude is laid bare. Are you kind to yourself when you fail? Are you willing to be seen struggling? Or do you only want to try things you're already good at? This is why picking up a new skill, even something simple like playing an instrument, learning to code, baking bread, or solving logic puzzles is so essential. The task isn't the point. The point is what the struggle reveals. The point is what you become by showing up daily to something that doesn't reward you instantly. Too many people claim they don't have time to learn, but they spend hours each week consuming entertainment, scrolling past the present moment. They believe they already know enough, yet their curiosity has quietly died. That's what mental decay looks like. Not a loud collapse, just the slow erosion of wonder, of willingness, of humility. Stoicism invites you to flip that, to turn your attention back inward and ask, what have I not yet learned that would stretch me? You don't need to follow trends. You don't need to enroll in a program. Just start where you are. Learn something your past self would never have expected. It could be sketching. It could be chess. It could be brewing tea with intentionality. Anything that forces your brain to work differently than it has before. Yes, you will feel awkward, but in that awkwardness is real growth. That's what Da Vinci understood. He wasn't great because he mastered one thing. He was great because he never stopped learning. Painting, anatomy, engineering, philosophy. His mind was always in motion. He didn't learn to impress, he learned to understand, and in doing so, became timeless. If you feel a flicker of resistance to this idea, take that as a signal. It means your comfort zone is being touched, and comfort zones are not bad, but they are small, and the mind was not meant to live small, it was meant to reach. So don't aim to master a new skill overnight, just begin. Spend 10 minutes fumbling through it. Notice your impatience. Notice the voice that wants to quit. Watch it. Don't obey it, because on the other side of that voice is the real you, the one who remembers how to wonder, how to explore, how to grow. The payoff isn't fame or praise, it's a quieter mind, a sharper eye, a spirit that adapts, recovers, evolves. And when you live like that long enough, you'll find you're no longer chasing intelligence. You're embodying it, not in the way you speak, but in how you notice, how you respond, how you choose to learn even when no one's watching. From this place of practiced discomfort, of deliberate learning, of daily challenge, something beautiful happens. You begin to transform not just your mind, but your way of seeing the world. And with that clarity, you're ready for the next lesson, one that moves from thought into presence, from sharpening the mind to mastering the moment. Let's continue. 6. Master emotional intelligence. Before any action, before any decision, before any mistake or breakthrough, there's always a thought, a sentence you whisper to yourself. It's quiet, almost invisible, but it shapes everything that follows. You could face a failure and tell yourself, I'm not cut out for this. Or you could say, I'm still figuring this out. Same setback, completely different outcomes. The first closes a door, the second leaves it open. Most people assume intelligence begins with data, with facts, figures, memory. But the Stoics taught that intelligence begins much earlier in the interpretation of our experience. Before we act, we assign meaning. That meaning becomes the lens through which we judge ourselves and the world. Marcus Aurelius called it the control of perception. And to him, it wasn't just helpful, it was everything. You can't control whether someone criticizes you, whether the job offer falls through, whether the person you love walks away. But you can control the sentence that forms in your mind right after. That sentence, "They hate me," or "What can I learn from this?" becomes the steering wheel for your behavior, your energy, your growth. This is not about denial. It's not about pretending nothing hurts. It's about choosing how you define what hurts, how long it stays with you, and what you allow it to mean about you. And this isn't just ancient wisdom. Neuroscience affirms it. Your brain doesn't respond to what's true. It responds to what's repeated. If you keep saying, "I'm not good at this," your brain rewires itself to conserve energy and avoid effort. It adjusts your motivation accordingly. You don't even realize you're shutting doors before you ever walk through them. Think of your inner dialogue as the code of your mental operating system. Every sentence you say to yourself is a line of that code. And like any system, poor code creates glitches, mental blocks, emotional fog, low confidence. Most people never debug it. They just live with the system as it is, unaware that the beliefs running in the background are writing their reality. For example, say you've told yourself for years, "I'm terrible with people." You avoid conversations, you don't reach out, you don't speak up. Over time, that belief becomes a wall. Not because it's true, but because it was repeated. You programmed yourself into a role you never meant to play. The Stoics would call that imprisonment by self-image, not by fate, not by other people, but by your own unexamined thinking. So the real question isn't, how smart am I? The question is, how much of my intelligence have I silenced with rigid, limiting beliefs? If you want to test this, listen to the way you speak to yourself in hard moments. When you're rejected, when you make a mistake, when someone criticizes you. Is your first response self-condemnation or curiosity? Is it, "They're right, I'm worthless," or "What's useful here? What can I grow from?" That tiny shift is the beginning of emotional intelligence. It's easy to think of emotional intelligence as knowing how to read others, how to speak well, how to navigate social dynamics. But in Stoicism, emotional intelligence begins with the inner script. Before you can manage anyone else's energy, you must learn to manage your own interpretation of reality. Let's look at a simple example. Someone receives tough feedback at work. If their first thought is, "They hate me," "I'm no good," their mind shuts down. Creativity fades. Problem-solving vanishes. But if their first thought is, "They're unhappy with this version, how do I improve it?" then the brain stays open, adaptable, intelligent. It remains in motion. This is the practice the Stoics trained in every day. To pause between the stimulus and the response. To insert a better belief in that space. Epictetus said, "It's not things themselves that disturb us, but our judgments about them." Albert Ellis, the father of cognitive behavioral therapy, echoed this thousands of years later with the ABC model. A for the activating event, B for the belief, and C for the consequence. The event doesn't dictate your emotion. The belief does. That's why two people can face the exact same rejection and one collapses while the other evolves. The difference? One chose to frame it as the end. The other saw it as an adjustment. And this isn't about positive thinking. The Stoics didn't advocate delusion. They didn't say, "Everything will be fine." They said, "Own your response, choose your frame, or someone else will." They understood what modern science now confirms. Self-talk is a form of neuroprogramming. The words you use are not just expressions. They are commands your brain takes seriously. "I'll never change" is a command. "I'm learning to change" is another. Which one you repeat becomes your future self. So what can you do with this? You can start small. Each day, find one belief that limits you, one phrase you repeat when you're tired, afraid, or discouraged. Question it, rewrite it, not with fake positivity, but with honest clarity. Instead of "I'm always impatient," try "I'm noticing my impatience and working with it." Instead of "I'm not the creative type," say "Creativity is a skill I'm beginning to practice." Instead of "This is who I am," ask, "Who might I become if I stopped repeating that story?" This is not a quick fix. It's a practice, a training. And like physical training, it builds strength over time. Each day you challenge your old thought patterns. Your emotional intelligence sharpens. Each time you pause and choose a more accurate belief, you carve a new groove in your brain. Eventually, the mind begins to cooperate. You stop reacting, you start responding, you become less fragile. Not because you never feel emotion, but because your emotions no longer dictate your reality. They become data, not identity. This is what separates those who stay stuck from those who evolve. The stuck person demands the world to change. The evolving person rewrites their own operating code and watches how the world shifts in response. That's what emotional intelligence really is. The courage to face the story in your head and ask, "Is this helping me grow?" And if it's not, to change it. So the next time you're frustrated with yourself, when learning feels slow, when results don't show, when your mind wants to give up, don't push harder. Look inward. Ask better questions. Listen to your self-talk, not as background noise, but as the blueprint of your becoming. Because intelligence doesn't just live in books or in test scores. It lives in the quiet decision to meet life with awareness, to pause before labeling your experience, and to speak to yourself like someone worth believing in. And that mindset, cultivated slowly, gently, through daily reflection, is the soil where all other learning takes root. Next, we'll explore how to bring that same clarity into action through simple, consistent mental practices that keep your mind agile, resilient, and focused. Not for applause, not for perfection, but to keep growing where others stop. Let's continue. 7. Eat smart for mental clarity. There's something you depend on more than anything else in life, yet rarely take time to tend to it. Your mind. You use it to make decisions, form judgments, interpret events, remember names, read people, and guide every step you take. But how often do you stop to ask, is this thing I rely on every day being nourished? Not just maintained, nourished, trained, awakened. We obsess over physical health. We adjust our diets, track our steps, moisturize, supplement, detox. But the health of the mind, it's often left to chance. The truth is, mental clarity doesn't happen by accident. Just like the body, the mind responds to how it's fed, how it's exercised, and how it's rested. A friend once told me that the way he makes his coffee each morning is sacred, not because he's a coffee snob, but because it's the one part of his day where he makes choices consciously. What beans today? What temperature water? How long to brew? These choices seem small, but he says they anchor him. They remind him he's not just reacting to the day, he's living it. That, in essence, is what the Stoics meant by living deliberately. It's not about dramatic decisions or big achievements. It's about choosing how you engage with the smallest parts of life. Because the way you do anything eventually becomes the way you do everything. Mental clarity isn't a result of doing more. Often it comes from doing things differently, like brushing your teeth with the opposite hand, sitting in a different chair than usual, or asking your partner, "What did you think about most today?" and truly listening to the answer without interruption. These shifts break autopilot. They return your attention to the present, and that's the first principle of keeping your mind sharp. Stay awake, not just physically, but mentally. In a world where your phone can remember phone numbers, where explainers are always one tap away, where opinions flood your feed before you even form your own, attention becomes your rarest asset. The danger isn't just distraction, it's disengagement. When you no longer ask questions, when you stop noticing, when you move through your day not as a thinker but as a reactor, and the Stoic quietly rebels against that drift. I knew someone who lived this philosophy in the simplest, most beautiful way. His name was Edward, a software engineer by day, quiet, thoughtful, unassuming. But each week, Edward set aside time to try something he'd never done before. One week it was baking bread, another folding origami. One time he spent hours drawing perfect circles freehand. Not because he wanted to master these things, but because he wanted to remain a student of life. He told me the failures made him angry at first, frustrated, ashamed even. Why can't I draw a circle? But then the anger would pass, and what followed was satisfaction. Not the satisfaction of success, but of being alive inside his mind again. He said that learning to struggle gently was one of the only things that kept his brain from growing stiff. As children, we encounter newness every day. Tying shoes, riding bikes, spelling our own names. We fumble, we fail, we keep going. But as adults, we begin to trade challenge for efficiency. We take the same route to work, say the same things, think the same thoughts. And eventually, the edges of our minds start to blur. Intelligence doesn't die from lack of information. It dies from the absence of friction. So if you want clarity, ask yourself, what in my day requires effort, not just physical, but mental? If the answer is nothing, something is at risk. You don't need brain training apps. You need interruption. You need to confuse yourself just enough to stay curious. Read something that challenges your worldview. Try to explain an old idea from a new perspective. Learn an instrument you'll never play on stage. Rewrite a favorite story from the antagonist's point of view. Ask better questions. Give slower answers. These aren't games, they're resistance training for your intellect, not to perform, but to stay alive. And in a world engineered to make you passive, staying mentally active is a quiet form of resistance. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is pause and admit, I don't know. That sentence alone invites the mind to awaken, to ask, to learn. And every time you open that door, even slightly, you give your brain a reason to sharpen. The Stoics understood this deeply. Their wisdom wasn't in having the right answers, but in learning how to frame the right questions. They didn't wait for crisis to force them to grow. They prepared the mind daily through reflection, small discomforts, and deliberate awareness. The modern world will tempt you to skip this process. It will reward speed over depth, convenience over presence. But if you surrender to that pace, you may find yourself years down the line wondering when your thoughts stopped being your own. So don't ask, am I smart enough? Ask, am I engaged enough? Did you do something today that made you pause, made you think, made you ask, why do I do it this way? If not, that's not failure. That's opportunity. Mental clarity begins with awareness. It deepens with effort. And it thrives on change. You don't need to overhaul your life. You just need to shift one habit, one pattern, one sentence at a time, because busy doesn't mean awake. Accomplished doesn't mean aware. And routine doesn't mean wisdom. The sharpest minds aren't always loud. They're just the ones that never stopped paying attention. And when your attention sharpens, so does your intuition. You begin to detect subtleties, patterns, emotions, and that opens the door to a deeper kind of mastery, not of logic, but of presence. And that's where we're headed next, because clarity of mind is only half the path. To truly move through the world with strength, you need clarity of emotion as well. And in the next lesson, we'll explore how the Stoics trained their emotional muscles, not to suppress feeling, but to rule it with wisdom. Let's continue. 8. Think better through dialogue. When you imagine the wisest person you know, who comes to mind? Chances are, it's not someone who overwhelms a room with words or dazzles with academic degrees. It's probably someone quiet, someone calm, someone whose presence makes you feel more grounded. They don't jump into arguments, they don't flinch in chaos. They speak only when necessary, but when they do, their words carry weight. This is not the kind of intelligence that can be measured by IQ or resumes. It's deeper, it's composure, it's the art of holding yourself steady in a world constantly shaking. The Stoics understood this kind of intelligence well. They called it mastery of the self, not to be praised, but because they believed this was the true test of reason: to remain stable under pressure, to think clearly in moments of tension, to resist the pull of emotion when it threatens to hijack your judgment. In today's world, we call this emotional intelligence. But long before the term existed, the Stoics were living it. A friend of mine once shared a moment that stayed with her for years. She was leading a major project at her company, and due to a small oversight, it collapsed just before launch. Her boss exploded during a team meeting, berating her in front of everyone. The room tensed. Some people froze, others looked away. My friend, usually confident and assertive, didn't defend herself. She didn't shift blame. She simply stayed silent. Not out of fear, but out of discipline. After the meeting, she requested a private conversation. No excuses, no flattery. She acknowledged the mistake, outlined what went wrong, and offered a practical solution. A week later, the project was reinstated. And what changed her boss's mind wasn't the fix, it was her response, her calm, her clarity, her composure. That's not just professionalism, that's wisdom in action. Because let's be honest, most of our suffering doesn't come from disasters. It comes from how we react to small slights, careless words, and bruised pride. It comes from the stories we tell ourselves in silence and the emotions we let drive the wheel. In Daniel Goleman's framework, emotional intelligence has 5 parts, and each one mirrors something deeply Stoic. The first is self-awareness. The Stoics trained this daily through journaling, reflection, and observation. Marcus Aurelius didn't write meditations for the world. He wrote it to study himself. They didn't write to vent. They wrote to clarify, to ask, what exactly did I feel today? Why did I react that way? Was that useful or just habitual? Try it tonight. Write down one moment from your day that triggered you. Ask those same questions. You'll begin to see patterns you didn't notice before. You'll become less reactive and more intentional. Next is self-regulation. This is the cornerstone of Stoic discipline. Life throws storms. You don't calm the storm, you steady the boat. One way to practice this is simple. When you feel the urge to reply in anger, pause for 10 minutes. Don't just ignore the message. Write your full, unfiltered response on paper. Fold it. Walk away, come back, read it again. You'll see how much of that reaction came not from truth, but from unexamined emotion. This isn't suppression, it's refinement. Stoics didn't reject emotion, they just refused to be ruled by it. The third element is intrinsic motivation. The Stoics didn't seek applause. They didn't live for approval. They acted in alignment with values, regardless of recognition. Ask yourself, when was the last time I did something right, even though no one noticed? Maybe you returned something you found. Maybe you apologized first. Maybe you offered help without being asked. These are not small things. These are choices that train your moral compass. And when you act from that place, not for reward, but because it's right, your sense of identity becomes unshakable. Fourth is empathy. And yes, the Stoics had that too. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily that people don't hurt us intentionally. They act based on their limited understanding, their fear, their pain. He wrote, "Whenever someone does you wrong, ask, what is their mind like?" Not to excuse, but to understand. That understanding dissolves anger. Maybe the rude cashier just lost someone. Maybe the cold friend is silently struggling. When you shift the question from, "Why are they doing this to me?" to, "What might they be carrying?" you reclaim your peace. That shift is wisdom, and it changes how you move through the world. Lastly, social skill. Not charisma, not persuasion, but the ability to connect without losing your center. The Stoics weren't loud, they weren't smooth talkers, but when they spoke, it mattered. One sentence, well-timed, can shift a conversation, calm a conflict, or bring clarity to confusion. That's not talent, that's restraint. Listening more than you speak, asking questions instead of making assumptions, speaking with purpose instead of noise. You've probably seen someone do this. In a room of rising tension, they say something simple, and the room exhales. That's emotional intelligence in motion, not control over others. Control over self, not silence from fear, but from clarity. In today's world, we're constantly pushed to react. Headlines, comments, notifications, everything is designed to provoke. But the Stoic resists that pull. They train themselves to respond, not react, to stay still inside, even when the world spins fast. So if you want to become sharper, calmer, more grounded, start here. Learn to listen to yourself before you speak to others. Observe your emotions like weather, not identity. Respond when it serves. Stay silent when it protects. You don't need to be a monk, just a student of yourself. And if you've read this far, drop a quiet comment. Still mind. It means you're walking that path, not toward perfection, but toward presence. And presence, once cultivated, gives birth to clarity. A mind that isn't hijacked by every emotion is a mind ready to think clearly, speak wisely, and lead gently. From this point on, the work deepens. Because mental clarity isn't just about reflection, it's about what you put into your mind and into your body. And so next, we turn to something you've done every day of your life, often without thought. Something that shapes your energy, your focus, your emotions more than you might realize. Your food. Let's explore. 9. Discomfort drives growth. We often speak of the mind as if it floats above the body, untouched by fatigue, immune to hunger, somehow divorced from the physical world. But if you've ever seen a brilliant scholar collapse from exhaustion, or watch someone sharp lose all composure after a few nights of poor sleep, you'll understand instantly, intellect does not exist in isolation. The mind is not some independent force. It lives in the body, it feeds through the body, it breaks down with the body. The Stoics knew this long before science caught up. Marcus Aurelius didn't just reflect on logic or virtue, he reminded himself daily that strength of character begins with stewardship of the self. If you want a clear mind, a stable spirit, a focused will, you must start with what fuels you. Not thoughts, not quotes, food. And yet how few of us treat eating as a mental practice. We think of food as fuel or comfort or habit. We eat to soothe sadness, to reward achievement, to distract from boredom. But how often do we pause and ask, is this making me think better? Imagine trying to read Epictetus after chugging 2 sodas and a bag of chips. Your mind doesn't sharpen, it drifts, it scatters. The ideas slip through your fingers. Now imagine something different. A clean breakfast, warm oatmeal with seeds, fresh fruit, water. Your stomach settles, your head feels light, your focus deepens, your thoughts slow down in the best way, not sluggish, but calm. That's not imagination, that's biology. The brain consumes more than 20% of our daily energy. It's always on, always working, and what you feed it determines how well it performs. Modern diets, rich in processed sugars, oils, and empty calories, fog the very machine we rely on for every decision. We scroll endlessly looking for clarity, while our internal systems struggle just to stay afloat. The irony? We live in the information age, but starve the very organ that processes it. Socrates, though he wrote nothing himself, was remembered not for flashy intellect, but for quiet wisdom, long walks, thoughtful dialogue, simple meals. He treated the body not as an afterthought, but as a partner in thought. Philosophy for him wasn't separate from daily life, it was the shape of daily life. And that's what the Stoics understood. You can't control most of the world, but you can control what you put on your plate. Recent science confirms what ancient wisdom has long whispered. Omega-3s help reinforce cognitive function. Fermented foods like yogurt or kimchi support gut health, which directly affects mood and memory. Moderate caffeine improves focus. Too much triggers anxiety. Green tea calms without dulling. The relationship between body and brain isn't vague. It's measurable. So why don't we treat it seriously? Maybe because food is so familiar, so ordinary, we overlook its power. But it's the ordinary things, the ones we repeat daily, that shape who we become. You don't need to become a nutritionist. You don't need to follow a rigid diet. You just need to start noticing what you eat, how it makes you feel, and what kind of thoughts follow. I once met a man who told me something strange. He said, "I didn't fully understand Stoicism until I changed my breakfast." When I asked what he meant, he laughed. "I used to fall asleep trying to read Marcus Aurelius before sunrise. Now I eat clean and light," and those words hit different. He wasn't joking. The fog lifted. His mind stayed with the page longer. He could reflect instead of forcing comprehension. That's the quiet power of nutrition. Not in making you superhuman, but in removing what dulls your natural clarity. You don't have to cut out every pleasure. You just have to ask, what's helping me think? What's slowing me down? Maybe that's the most honest food journal you'll ever need. And no, this isn't about discipline as punishment. It's about respect, self-respect. A clear meal for a clear mind. Water before coffee. Greens with lunch. Nuts instead of candy. These are not acts of sacrifice. They are small, quiet decisions that echo a bigger truth. I want to show up sharp, present, awake. And here's the surprising part. Once you start eating this way, you'll begin to lose your craving for what once numbed you. Not because of willpower, but because your body remembers what clarity feels like. You don't need rules. You need experience. Let your body feel what real nourishment does to your mood, your focus, your peace. And once it feels it, the rest follows. Freedom, said the Stoics, is not doing what you want. It's no longer wanting what weakens you. When the body is steady, the mind softens. Not dull, but calm. You become less reactive, less explosive, more patient. You listen longer, you interrupt less, you reflect more. That's when real wisdom begins to take root. Not as a thought you had, but as a presence you carry. Because once you start treating your body as part of your philosophy, something profound shifts. You stop seeing the body as a burden, you start seeing it as a vessel, and from that vessel your energy flows into work, into conversations, into challenges. You no longer leak power through poor habits, you channel it. So if you're wondering where to begin your next chapter of growth, don't look for some grand awakening. Start at the table, make one better choice at your next meal. Then listen, not to advice, not to external noise, but to what your body says afterward. The mind is always talking, but so is the body. Wisdom comes when both speak the same language. And if something in you resonates with this idea, if you've ever felt that strange mental fog after a heavy meal, or the sudden clarity after a light one, drop a comment. Mind fuel. It's a reminder that even your smallest choices echo through your deepest thoughts. And as this clarity deepens, something else emerges. A shift in how you connect, not just with yourself, but with others. You begin to see conversations differently. You listen more closely. You express with more intention. You move from solitude to dialogue, not to be heard, but to understand. And that's where we're heading next. Because once the mind is clear and the body aligned, wisdom wants to move outward, into words, into questions, into meaningful conversations. Let's continue. 10. Train your body, sharpen your mind. Think about the most impactful conversations you've ever had. They probably weren't the ones where everyone agreed with you. They were the ones where someone asked, "But why?" Not to attack you, but to understand. Not to win, but to help you think more clearly. That moment when you had to pause, reflect, and realize maybe you hadn't truly understood your own position after all. In a world that rewards quick answers and louder voices, someone who listens deeply, asks sincerely, and challenges gently stands out like a flame in the dark. And it's in that flickering discomfort, not certainty, that real wisdom begins. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "If anyone can prove me wrong and show me my mistake, I will gladly change, for I seek the truth, and the truth has never harmed anyone." That sentence is profound, not because he was emperor, but because of how rare such humility is, even more so when it comes from someone with power. Stoicism doesn't teach arrogance, it teaches openness. It teaches us to welcome every encounter, even disagreement, as a chance to sharpen our thinking. Too often we imagine growth as something personal, internal, something that happens in solitude. But the Stoics knew better. Life itself is a dialogue, and nothing refines the mind faster than another perspective, especially one that contradicts your own. Not a shouting match, not an online debate full of noise and ego, but a sincere conversation, one that leaves you quiet afterward, thinking, not victorious, but awakened. Imagine your mind as a rough stone full of hidden brilliance. If you spend your whole life surrounded by people who think like you, speak like you, and believe the same things as you, that stone stays dull. It shines only in your imagination, but if you expose it to friction, conversations that test your logic, challenge your assumptions, stretch your comfort, that's when the carving begins. That's when your thoughts become clear, sharp, real. Look around and notice the people who seem genuinely wise. They don't talk much, they don't rush to respond, but when they speak, you listen. Why? Because their words aren't rehearsed. They're earned through questions, through being wrong, through the courage to not pretend they know it all. And most of that wisdom didn't come from thinking alone, it came from being around people who made them think deeper. Here's the paradox. The smarter you are, the more you need challenge. Because smart people can rationalize anything. They're great at building arguments. So if no one pushes back, they start mistaking their own logic for truth. That's where humility disappears. And that's why someone who says, "I don't see it that way, can I explain why?" is a gift. Of course, it never feels like a gift in the moment. Being contradicted stings. But the Stoic sees that sting as a signal, a moment to ask, what am I defending? Is it truth or just my pride? And when you don't react immediately, when you stay calm and curious, the conversation becomes something else. A shared search, not for victory, but for clarity. This doesn't just apply to formal debate. It happens in daily life, in families, friendships, meetings, cafes. Every time you hear something that doesn't sit right, and instead of snapping back, you pause and say, "Tell me more," you're training a kind of mental muscle. Tolerance for uncertainty. That muscle is rare and powerful. In the workplace, it's not the loudest voice that leads. It's the one who listens, the one who invites challenge, the one who says, "What are we missing?" and really means it. Jeff Bezos once said, "People who are right a lot listen a lot. Not because they're always correct, but because they're always learning. And learning begins where comfort ends." Ray Dalio, founder of one of the most successful investment firms in the world, built a culture where employees are required to challenge their bosses, even him, because he knows that untested ideas are dangerous, and every challenge either makes the idea stronger or exposes its flaw. Either way, growth happens. Neuroscience backs this up. When someone challenges you and you stay calm, your brain activates the prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for reason and reflection. But when you react emotionally, the amygdala takes over, pulling you into fight or flight. Learning stops. Growth stalls. That's why debate isn't just mental, it's biological training. It strengthens the part of you that can stay rational when tested. And here's the beauty. You don't need to be in a university to practice this. You don't need a debate stage. You just need curiosity. Read articles that make you uncomfortable. Talk to people who think differently. Ask your friends, "What do you believe that I probably wouldn't agree with?" Then listen, not to argue, but to understand. Because wisdom doesn't grow in echo chambers. It grows in the friction of respectful disagreement. Proverbs says, "As iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens another." That doesn't mean constant agreement. It means challenge, resistance, refinement. So ask yourself, when was the last time a conversation changed your mind? When was the last time someone helped you see yourself differently? If it's been a while, maybe you're not being tested enough. Maybe it's time to invite tension. Not conflict, but conversation. Not to be proven wrong, but to be made wiser. Try this. Find someone you trust, but disagree with. Bring up a topic you know you see differently. Then speak less. Ask more. When they say something that jars you, resist the urge to correct. Instead say, "I never thought of it that way," and mean it. You might be surprised how much you didn't see. Not because you were wrong, but because you were limited, and now you're not. And if that idea speaks to you, if the thought of a real, honest conversation feels like something you've been missing, leave a quick comment below. Challenge me. It's not about being right. It's about being awake. Because that's what this whole journey is. A quiet sharpening. Not to prove yourself, but to become more of yourself. And in the next part, we'll go even further into the place where growth truly begins. Not in clarity, but in discomfort. The very thing most people avoid is the very thing that will shape you most. Let's walk toward it, not away. Let's continue. 11. Use art to spark creativity. If you look back on the moments that shaped who you are today, you'll probably realize they didn't happen on days when everything went smoothly. Growth rarely visits you while you're sipping coffee under soft sunlight, ticking off a perfect to-do list, with your favorite playlist humming in the background. Growth doesn't arrive wrapped in comfort. It walks in when things fall apart, through failure, rejection, confusion, and the quiet emptiness that seeps in, even when everything on the outside looks fine. It doesn't ask if you're ready. It only asks one thing: will you stay present through this? The Stoics didn't glorify suffering, but they didn't hide from it either. They understood that discomfort wasn't an enemy. It was a spark. A philosopher's fire isn't lit by ease, it's lit by friction. A mind sharpened by challenge burns brighter than one that has never been tested. No friction, no fire, no resistance, no depth. The trouble is, most of us are raised with a reflex to avoid discomfort. When something feels hard, we assume something is wrong. When we fail, we back away. When things get tense, we interpret it as a warning rather than an invitation. But the Stoics flipped that. They believed discomfort was a signal not to retreat, but to lean in. Imagine trying to learn a new language. At first, it's frustrating. The words don't make sense. The grammar twists your thoughts. You forget basic phrases seconds after learning them. Your confidence crumbles. But in that very struggle, right there, in the mess, is where your brain starts wiring new pathways. That fog of confusion isn't a barrier to intelligence. It's the soil in which intelligence grows. Modern neuroscientists call this desirable difficulty, the sweet spot of effort. Not so easy that you stay still, not so hard that you shut down, but just challenging enough that your brain has to stretch. This concept doesn't just apply to intellect. You see it in physical training too: a heavier lift, a longer run, a few extra push-ups when your muscles beg you to stop. In that moment of tension, the body transforms, and the mind, it follows the same law. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Meditations not in peace, but in pain, not in leisure, but amid war and illness." He didn't write to escape discomfort. He wrote to understand it, to use it, to ask himself, if I feel this, maybe I'm exactly where I need to be. What is this experience trying to teach me? That question is the doorway to wisdom. Consider a time you were harshly criticized. Maybe it was your boss, maybe a partner, maybe a stranger online. Your first reaction might have been defensiveness, embarrassment, rage. But if you paused and asked, what is this revealing about me? That's where the shift begins. Wisdom doesn't emerge from praise, it emerges from pause. Or think about a conversation with someone who sees the world differently than you. It would be easy to walk away, or to argue, or to dig in. But if you stay, listen fully, and try to understand their logic, even if you still disagree, your mental muscles stretch. Like a body pulled in unfamiliar ways, your mind learns flexibility. That's real strength. The older we get, the harder this becomes. When we're young, struggle is expected. But once we feel stable, successful, even wise, it's tempting to stay where we're comfortable, to read what affirms us, to do what we're already good at. And slowly, without noticing, the flame fades. Not because we lack brilliance, but because we stopped inviting resistance. Nassim Nicholas Taleb, in Anti-Fragile, explained this beautifully. Systems that thrive under stress don't just survive, they grow. And the human mind is one of those systems. Too little pressure, and it withers. Too much, and it breaks. But with just enough friction, it flourishes. So how do we apply this? How do we welcome discomfort without collapsing under it? Try a small evening ritual. Write down 3 things from your day that made you uncomfortable. Then ask, why did this trigger me? What can I learn from it? 1 page. That's all. But over time, you'll notice something. The same moments that once made you flinch now become moments of insight. Your reactions slow. Your perspective deepens. Your mind no longer seeks to be right, it seeks to grow. But Stoicism also gives us a boundary. Not all discomfort is valuable. There's a difference between a challenge that refines you and a situation that depletes you. If a relationship constantly crushes your spirit, if a job suffocates your values, enduring that isn't strength, it's self-neglect. The Stoics weren't martyrs. They believed in discernment. Endure what builds you. Walk away from what breaks you. The real test is recognizing the difference. Ultimately, this lesson boils down to a quiet question. Can you stay with this discomfort just a little longer? Can you let it speak before you silence it? Most people run. You sit. Most people numb. You listen. And in that gap between reaction and reflection, wisdom enters. The Stoics taught that wisdom doesn't just live in the mind, it lives in the body, in how you breathe when you're afraid, in how you walk through uncertainty, in how you respond when your hands shake and your voice wavers, not with bravado, but with presence. Because real growth, the kind that changes not just what you know, but who you are, doesn't happen while sitting still. It happens in motion, in doing something unfamiliar, in failing without collapse, in choosing the slightly harder path again and again until that path becomes you. And that's what we'll move into next. Because the mind may lead, but it's the body that carries you through the storm. And if you train it with the same intention, the same quiet courage, the same embrace of discomfort, your entire being begins to change. Let's keep going. 12. Apply knowledge. Fast. Imagine this. You own a beautiful high-performance car, built for speed, precision, and power. It's the kind of machine that could dominate any road, but you don't use it. You keep it locked in a garage. You never tune the engine, change the oil, or rotate the tires. Occasionally, you take it out for a brief drive, then tuck it away again. Over time, no matter how perfect it was, the car begins to decay. It rusts, it stalls, its potential fades. That's exactly what happens when we treat the body as separate from the mind. No matter how intelligent you are, how many books you read, or how many ideas you consume, if your body is neglected, your mind suffers. Intelligence doesn't live in the brain alone. It depends on the strength and rhythm of the entire system. The Stoics understood this. Seneca once wrote, "The body should be treated more rigorously, that it may not be disobedient to the mind. Not because the body matters more, but because a sluggish body dulls the sharpest thoughts." Modern science now echoes what ancient wisdom already knew. Physical movement is not just for vanity or health. It's brain fuel. Exercise increases oxygen flow to the brain. It activates the hippocampus, the region responsible for memory and learning. It triggers the release of endorphins, natural chemicals that reduce stress and lift mood. In short, moving your body doesn't just make you stronger, it makes you smarter. Many people still believe that intellectual growth is a purely mental pursuit. They imagine wisdom forming in silence, in reading rooms, with quiet reflection. And yes, stillness has its place. But if you've ever gone for a walk and suddenly had a brilliant idea, you know what I'm talking about. Movement clears the fog. Ideas flow more freely. Emotion settles. You see more clearly. There's data to support this too. Studies show that regular aerobic exercise can increase gray matter in the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain linked to decision-making, self-control, and focus. Other research found that just 16 weeks of moderate exercise 3 times a week significantly improved mood and cognitive function in middle-aged adults. In fact, the effects were comparable to antidepressants. And more importantly, those who stuck with the habit experienced the lowest relapse rates months later. This isn't just theory, it's a signal. Your mind is telling you it needs the body's help. That fog, that fatigue, that low motivation, it's not always a mindset problem. Sometimes it's a movement problem. Take the story of Jack, a 38-year-old software engineer. Once admired for his intellect and drive, he began to fade. Burnout crept in. He read books, enrolled in online courses, tried meditation apps, but nothing seemed to work. Until one day, during a company presentation, Jack completely blanked out. His mind froze. Not a word came. He left the office shaken, and instead of going home, he drove to the gym, a place he hadn't visited in over 3 years. That first week nearly broke him. He could barely jog for 5 minutes. His body ached in ways he'd forgotten. But he kept going. By the 3rd week, something changed. He began sleeping better. Ideas returned. His clarity sharpened. After 2 months, people barely recognized the new Jack, not just leaner, but more alive. "I don't work out for abs," he told me. "I work out to get my brain back." Neuroscience calls this neurogenesis, the process of growing new brain cells. Yes, even in adulthood, but there's a catch. It only happens if the body moves. Exercise doesn't just boost blood flow. It builds the architecture for learning. It lowers cortisol, the stress hormone that wrecks focus and memory. It rewires emotion. It reignites energy. Your sharpest thoughts cannot live in a body that's constantly overwhelmed. The solution doesn't need to be extreme. You don't need a gym membership or a personal trainer. You just need rhythm. 10 minutes of brisk walking in the morning, stretching for 5 minutes every 90 minutes during your workday, 1 afternoon hike each week. Think of movement as a mental reset button, like clearing out your computer's RAM so it can function again. Over time, you'll notice the difference. You'll retain more of what you read. You'll feel present in conversations. You'll respond rather than react. And most importantly, your motivation will rise, not because you waited for inspiration, but because you acted first. This is one of Stoicism's deepest teachings. Don't wait to feel good to begin. Begin, and the good feelings will follow. Action before emotion. Discipline, then freedom. And here's the truth. The world doesn't reward what you know. It rewards what you apply. It's not enough to read, to listen, to nod along. At some point, knowledge must meet the body. Ideas must be carried in your footsteps, not just in your notes. If your mind is the strategy, your body is the execution. The Stoics didn't divide the two. They trained both, day after day. Their wisdom was born in motion. Maybe right now you're sitting in bed, or lounging in a cafe. That's fine. But before you continue, I invite you to pause, stand up, stretch your arms, roll your shoulders, take a deep breath, and walk around the room for just 30 seconds. Let your body re-enter the conversation. You'll feel the shift immediately. That's clarity. That's you waking up. And when your mind begins to wake, something else stirs with it. Creativity. Not just logical thinking, but a deeper sensitivity. You notice color, sound, emotion. A song hits differently. A poem lingers. A painting speaks. Your perception expands beyond the analytical. And that's where we're heading next. Because intelligence isn't just reason, it's imagination. The kind of creativity that can be awakened with a single image, a single melody, a moment of stillness. So, if you've made it this far, drop a comment. mind and body. Just 2 words to mark the shift. And then let's move forward into the world of art and how beauty itself can become a Stoic teacher. 13. Question before believing. There's a kind of intelligence that's slowly vanishing from the modern world. It's not the kind measured by how fast you can solve problems or how sharp your logic sounds in conversation. It's not the kind that earns applause, likes, or credentials. This intelligence shows up in silence, in stillness, in the unexpected pause when you hear a piece of music that stirs something ancient in you. When you stand in front of a painting you can't explain but can't look away from. When a single line of poetry softens the edge of your thoughts and you don't know why. It's like walking into a room of your own mind you never knew existed. Today, we're trained to move fast, be efficient, be rational, justify everything. We're encouraged to explain, define, and defend. But intelligence, the kind that endures and deepens, grows in spaces too subtle for logic to enter. It grows in what you feel but cannot name. And this is where art, music, and beauty enter. When Epictetus said, "We have 2 ears and 1 mouth so that we may listen twice as much as we speak," he wasn't just talking about conversations. He was pointing towards something quieter, a deeper listening, not to others, but to what's already within. Art doesn't demand that you argue or prove anything. It only asks that you show up, open, aware, still. And when you do, something begins to shift. Not dramatically, but gently. Thought rearranges itself. Emotion finds its rightful place. Insight arrives not by force, but by invitation. Creative thought doesn't come from grinding harder. It doesn't appear on a to-do list. The more you chase it, the further it retreats. But when you sit in front of a blank canvas with no intention except to see what comes through, or when your fingers move across an unfamiliar instrument, not to impress but to explore, a strange clarity begins to take shape. Thoughts you couldn't grasp through thinking alone rise to the surface. Emotion unclogs. Your mind loosens. Science once again affirms what the Stoics intuited long ago. Music, especially complex forms like Baroque or jazz, activates areas of the brain responsible for memory, creativity, and emotional balance. Art doesn't just decorate the mind, it reorganizes it. Like opening windows in a dusty room. Suddenly, space. Suddenly, breath. You've probably had this experience. You spend hours thinking your way through a problem. Nothing works. Then you walk outside, see sunlight dance on the trees, or hear a distant melody, and the solution floats into view. You didn't get smarter in that moment. You just stopped blocking the answer. The world doesn't value that process much. We're told to be productive, not poetic. We're encouraged to master time, not waste it with music or stillness. But that's the lie. These so-called luxuries, watching the clouds, painting for no one, reading a poem aloud to yourself, they hold a kind of lived intelligence. One that knows when to act and when to rest, when to speak and when to listen, when to push and when to let go. Winston Churchill, one of history's most pragmatic minds, painted regularly, not for glory, not for sale, but to quiet himself. He called painting complete as a distraction. Albert Einstein turned to his violin when physics made no sense. He didn't try to solve equations while playing. He let music dissolve the need for answers. And in that release, answers found him. You don't need to be Einstein or Churchill. You just need to try. Let color guide your hand for no reason. Let a strange piece of music enter your space. Not to understand it, just to feel it. Because intelligence isn't about mastering meaning. It's It's about allowing meaning to arise without command. Art won't make you smarter the way a textbook might, but it will soften the mental armor that keeps real wisdom out. It helps you ask better questions. Why do I believe this? What am I afraid to feel? What story am I still carrying that no longer serves me? These aren't academic questions, they're human ones, and when asked sincerely, they transform how you live. If your mind is a garden, then art is rain. Quiet, irregular but necessary. Without it, the ground hardens, beliefs become brittle, thoughts dry out. But with it, even buried seeds, ideas long forgotten, can bloom again. The question is, are you letting that rain in? Or are you holding the umbrella too tightly, afraid of discomfort? You don't need a museum or a grand symphony to begin. Start simple. Each morning or evening, play a piece of music you've never heard, not to like it, just to notice how it moves through you. Keep a small notebook. Not to journal, but to sketch, color, scribble, trace anything. Don't try to explain it. Let it be yours, raw, unpolished, real. And in doing so, you might find your thoughts softening, your emotions balancing. You may feel a kind of peace, not the absence of thought, but the alignment of thought and feeling. That's the center where real intelligence lives, where logic and intuition meet. Because sometimes the smartest thing you can do isn't to think harder, it's to feel deeper, to listen longer, to allow more. Have you ever tried applying knowledge when your mind was chaotic? It rarely works, but after 20 minutes of drawing or listening to music you don't understand, something clicks. It's not magic, it's alignment. Your mind returns to harmony. And in that state, the lessons you've learned begin to settle. You apply them not by force, but naturally, quietly, with depth. This is the kind of mind the Stoics revered. Not loud, not showy, but grounded, receptive, clear. Not easily swayed by praise or panic, but capable of seeing through distraction into what truly matters. And once that balance is restored, there's something else waiting for you. Something practical, because it's not enough to feel deeply or know wisely. What gives intelligence its true power is the ability to act decisively, clearly, calmly, and that's exactly what we'll explore next. 14. Spot automatic thoughts. Wisdom is often described as a light in the dark, but what good is light if you never move forward? Knowledge that's never put to use is like stacking torches in a locked room, bright, impressive, and entirely useless. Stoicism doesn't admire how much you know. It cares about how much of what you know you live, not what you can recite, but how you respond when everything collapses, when someone disrespects you, when your plans fail, when your inner voice screams and no one's watching. Epictetus said, "Don't explain your philosophy, embody it." He didn't mean this as poetic metaphor. He meant it as a demand. Stop quoting, start living. And maybe, if you're honest, you've had seasons where you read more than you applied, consumed videos, highlighted quotes, nodded along, but changed very little. That's not unusual. Today, we confuse learning with growth. Every new idea gives the brain a little dopamine. It feels like progress. But it's often just a polished form of procrastination. You think you're moving forward, but really you're standing in the same place, spinning mental wheels. Why? Because the mind isn't a bookshelf. It's a forge. If you don't hammer what you've learned into action, it cools, rusts, and fades. Modern neuroscience confirms what the Stoics intuited. Reading without applying engages only a fraction of the brain. The prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for decision-making, restraint, and action, stays mostly quiet. You may feel intellectually alive, but your capacity for change remains untouched. Think of a child learning to swim. No number of books or lectures can replace the moment they step into cold water, heart racing, arms flailing. It's the fear, the flailing, the failure that teaches. Knowledge without embodiment is theory. Wisdom only becomes real when the body is involved, when emotion, sensation, behavior converge. Let's be brutally honest. You probably already know what to do. Sleep more, complain less, move your body, speak with intention, listen fully. But knowing isn't the issue. It's the space between knowing and doing where most of us get lost. That's the battleground, and Stoicism is your bridge. Let me tell you about James. He's not a monk or a philosopher. He's 35, works in IT, reads Marcus Aurelius every morning, journals, reflects, highlights the usual Stoic phrases: control what you can, respond, don't react. On paper, he's a model Stoic. But in meetings, when his sharp-tongued boss interrupts him yet again, James clenches his jaw, says nothing, walks out frustrated, and brings that frustration home. Harsh words at dinner, irritability in traffic, tension in his sleep. Then one day, a colleague looks him in the eye and says, "Seeing how you handled that meeting, I'm starting to question all that Stoic stuff you talk about." It wasn't said with malice. It just landed hard. Hard enough to break the illusion James held about himself. That was the turning point, not the insult, the mirror. He realized his practice existed only in his notebook, not in his breath, not in his words, not in his presence. At the next meeting, same boss, same chaos. But James was different. He didn't fight, didn't retreat. He asked questions, clarified calmly, said thank you, and left the room as if a weight had been lifted. No standing ovation, no spiritual awakening, just integrity, quiet, lived alignment. And that's when theory becomes character. So how do you begin living what you already know? Simple. Learn one, do one. After each book, podcast, quote, or insight, pause. Don't reach for the next thing. Ask, where can I apply this today? Not next month. Not when life calms down. Today. Learn about presence. Put your phone away at dinner. Read about discipline. Wake up 5 minutes earlier. Understand the value of gratitude. Call someone and say thank you. You don't need a master plan. You need a small, sincere act. Every action builds muscle. Every muscle reshapes character. Let's get practical. Set a rule. One insight, one action. If you consume 5 lessons a day but apply none, you're not growing, you're hoarding. And hoarded wisdom turns stale. Don't aim to be impressive, aim to be consistent. That's how intelligence becomes visible, not through what you can say, but how you respond to real life. When someone criticizes you, do you breathe or do you explode? When plans change, do you adapt or complain? When tired, do you still keep your promise to yourself? Wisdom doesn't make you louder. It makes you steadier, more rooted, less flinchy, less fragile. And here's a question to reflect on. How many times in the past week did you act on what you've learned? Not think about it. Act. If the answer is low, good. You've just found your growth edge. The point where theory must give way to application. You may ask, but what if I apply it wrong? The answer is, good. Mistakes are essential. They're not the enemy of wisdom. They're the chisels that shape it. The only person who never gets it wrong is the one who never begins. Epictetus didn't say, live your philosophy perfectly. He said, live it. Period. Imperfect, messy, clumsy action still counts, because every time you act with intention, you leave the realm of theory and enter the world of transformation. And the moment you start doing this, something shifts. You start seeing automatic thoughts before they hijack you. You catch the script. You slow it down. You realize you've been narrating your life with phrases that no longer serve you. I can't. I'm not ready. This always happens to me. But now, instead of believing those thoughts, you question them. You ask, is that true? Or is that just a reflex? That's when the real rewiring begins, not just in your brain, but in your identity. And that brings us to the next level of wisdom, beyond applying knowledge, into questioning it, not just doing what sounds good, but testing whether it's true, because not every insight is gold. Some are just noise, some are just flattery dressed as wisdom. So now, the next question becomes, how do you train your mind not just to apply, but to discern? That's where we're going next. 15. Trust your power to change. In the digital age, the threat isn't just ignorance, it's misplaced certainty. We're no longer drowning in the absence of information, we're drowning in too much of it. Headlines scream, algorithms curate, influencers persuade. But amid all this noise, Stoic wisdom whispers a quieter, more radical idea. Before you accept anything, question everything, especially the beliefs you hold about yourself. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The opinion of 10,000 men is of no value if none of them know anything about the subject." It's a sharp reminder that consensus doesn't equal truth. And just because an idea feels familiar or shows up everywhere doesn't mean it deserves a place in your mind. In fact, the more something is repeated without scrutiny, the more dangerous it becomes. Because the human mind doesn't operate on truth, it operates on repetition. This is where the Stoic mindset becomes your shield. Rational doubt isn't negativity. It's discipline, the ability to pause before believing, to examine before absorbing. And perhaps the most important question you'll ever ask isn't about the outside world, but your own internal framework. What if the limits I believe about myself aren't real? Most people never stop to ask that. They carry labels given to them as children, lazy, awkward, not creative, and wear them for life. But those labels weren't facts. They were passing judgments, spoken by people who might not have even understood you. The Stoics would say, "You are not what others say. You are what you choose to become." There's an idea in modern psychology that echoes this perfectly. It's called the self-fulfilling prophecy. When you believe something about yourself, even if it's false, you begin acting in ways that make it real. If you tell yourself, "I'm bad at math," you'll avoid it, struggle more when you try, and reinforce the belief. But if you tell yourself, "I'm still learning," the path opens. Not because you suddenly gain talent, but because you've removed the psychological chain holding you back. The Stoics understood this. They didn't believe in fixed identity, they believed in continuous practice. Epictetus, born a slave, didn't become wise because someone gave him permission. He became wise because he rejected his circumstances as a limitation. He chose to grow. And that choice, small, daily, stubborn, is the essence of change. Maybe you've told yourself for years, "I'm just not the type who can stay disciplined," or "I always mess things up." But ask yourself, who taught you that? Was it your own observation? Or was it inherited from someone else's frustration, your environment, or a moment of failure that you've mistaken for truth? You are not a finished product. You are a system, a collection of habits, patterns, memories, beliefs. And the good news is systems can be redesigned. A recent study by behavioral scientist Katie Milkman showed that people who made small changes, like walking for 10 minutes in the morning, triggered a cascade effect. sleep improved, focus sharpened, eating habits shifted, mood stabilized. Why? Because change is never isolated. One better habit creates leverage for more. It's a ripple, and those ripples begin with one belief: I can change. Picture your identity like software. What you believe about yourself is the code, and every thought you repeat, whether empowering or limiting, either patches the system or bugs it. Most people go their whole lives never updating the program. They keep running old code, scripts written during childhood or early adulthood, without ever questioning if it still serves them. Here's a small, practical way to begin. Each night, write down one belief you acted on today. Then ask, is this really me, or just something I've picked up? The question alone is powerful. You don't need to uproot your identity overnight. Just shine a light into its corners. Awareness is what begins the rewiring, and once you see a belief clearly, you're no longer bound by it. You've reclaimed authorship over your story. The most dangerous beliefs are the ones that feel like personality. I'm just anxious. I'm not assertive. I'm not creative. These aren't truths. These are rehearsed lines. And the Stoics would urge you to re-audition for your own life, because the role you play now might not be the one you're meant to grow into. There's a man I once met. He worked nights as a janitor at a local university. Quiet, polite, always reading something during his breaks. One day I asked him, "Why so many books?" He smiled and said, "Because I never got to go to college, but no one can stop me from educating myself." That man taught me more about change than any seminar. He didn't wait for circumstances to shift. He shifted himself. Maybe you've been waiting to feel ready, waiting for the right time, waiting for fear to disappear before you take the leap. But Stoicism is not about waiting, it's about beginning anyway. The Stoics didn't believe in destiny as something fixed. They believed in shaping fate through action. If your current life feels like a reflection of past limitations, remember, nothing's stopping you from editing that script except the belief that you can't. Now is a good time to pause and ask yourself something simple yet deep. What am I still doing today that's based on who I used to be? Are you avoiding public speaking because you froze once at 15? Are you avoiding intimacy because someone once hurt you? Are you playing small because long ago someone said, "Don't aim too high"? If so, that's not who you are. That's who you were when you had fewer tools, less awareness, and more fear. You've changed. So let your actions catch up. Seneca once said, "It is not because things are difficult that we do not dare. It is because we do not dare that they are difficult." The fear is not a signal to stop. It's a signal to step up. And if that first step is shaky, that's okay. What matters is that you're walking toward the version of yourself that lives beyond those limits. So where does that leave us? With a simple truth. You don't need to be fully confident. You don't need perfect conditions. You don't need permission. You only need the courage to act before you're ready. Because readiness is a result, not a prerequisite. And every act of change, no matter how small, is a statement of belief in your future. At the end of the day, intelligence isn't a static trait. It's a dynamic willingness to reflect, unlearn, and adapt. It's not the speed of your thoughts, but the depth of your understanding. Not how much you know, but how much you grow. And in a world that wants you to define yourself by your past, the Stoic stands apart, rooted in this truth. You are not your history. You are your habits. And habits can be changed. As you step into tomorrow, remember that you are not a final draft. You are a work in progress, and every breath you take is a chance to rewrite the next line. That's the Stoic way. Quiet, unshakable, relentlessly becoming. We've just walked through 15 lessons, not meant to impress the world, but to awaken something deeper within you. These aren't lessons for the mind alone, but for the whole self. Each one a small torch, meant to light the next few steps on your personal path toward clarity, strength, and presence. You've seen that intelligence isn't some distant talent reserved for the gifted. It is carved by daily choices, that to learn is not to collect facts, but to practice truth. That emotion is not weakness, but a mirror. That food isn't just fuel, but influence. That discomfort is not your enemy, it is your invitation. And perhaps most importantly, you've seen that change begins not with the world, but with a shift in perspective. When you question what you once believed, when you spot your unconscious thoughts, when you replace reaction with reflection, something changes. Quietly but unmistakably, you begin to rise. These 15 ideas are not the end. They are the beginning. Keys to doors only you can open. And if something in you stirred, an insight, a feeling, a quiet yes, take a moment to comment, "Still growing." Let that be your first act of embodiment. If you'd like to keep sharpening your inner life, subscribe and walk further with us. What comes next is not just another video, it's another step. And as long as you keep walking, you'll keep becoming. You are not behind, you are becoming. And the next chapter is already